Good morning. I'm here today to tell you about a book that Geshe-la gave me that gives me great hope for the collaboration between scientists and those who practice spirituality or religion. In this case, that religion is Buddhism, specifically Tibetan Buddhism. I especially want to thank Geshe-la, he's right there in the audience, by quoting the author's own words. Geshe Lobsang Negi is the key bridge, the crucial link that allowed our project to happen, sparked its beginning and evolution, drives its twists and turns, embodies its hopes and goals. Lobsang is more than an accomplished scholar and a bridge between two disparate traditions. He is one of the first Eastern monastics to be both a monk and a collaborator with Western research scientists. He thus exemplifies a new and hoped-for step in the continuing evolution of the Emory Tibet Science Initiative and in the developmental arc of such collaborations in general. The Dalai Lama has always been curious about how things work. From the earliest age, he was known to take apart clocks, movie projectors, and other devices in an attempt to learn how they work. But of course, at that time, being in Tibet and a product of Tibetan education, he had no access to the study of science. However, his order, the Gelug Order of Yellow Hats, has always stressed logic and reasoning, so he was no stranger to the basic principles and methods of science. Unfortunately for him, the Chinese invasion of Tibet drove him out of Tibet, and he now lives in exile in northern India. That has turned out to be highly fortunate for the rest of the world, especially the Western world, because now the philosophies and methods of Tibetan Buddhism have been made available to us, to our benefit. Living in exile also brought His Holiness into contact with people he was unlikely to meet in Tibet, not the least of which were scientists. Being an especially curious person, he instituted many meetings with various scientists from many fields, including physicists, biologists, neuroscientists, among others. He established the Mind and Life Institute to help him and others understand more about how Western science explains the world. The foremost concern of Buddhist philosophy is the alleviation of suffering. And the Dalai Lama believes that integrating science with the ancient wisdom of Buddhist thought would be beneficial to that end. So from his discussions with the scientists and his truly open mind, he decided that it would be valuable for monks to include the study of science in their monastic training. His goal was to implement a plan for educating monks in modern science, which included creating textbooks in the Tibetan language. As part of that goal, he forged a relationship with Emory University to teach monks science so they could translate the ideas of science into Tibetan and create the necessary textbooks. His main facilitator, who took on a vast responsibility for that project and for selecting the best scientists and teachers available at Emory for that purpose, was our very own Geshe-la, Dr. Lobsang Tenzin Negi. Today, the Dalai Lama's goal has been met, and a science curriculum has been fully instituted as part of a Tibetan monastic training. This book is also the result of the influence of Ari Eisen, a brilliant, brilliant scientist, a recipient of the Excellence in Teaching Award at Emory University. Dr. Negi asked Ari if he would help respond to the Dalai Lama's goals by being one of the teachers who would take on this role by teaching biology to monks. Fortunately for all, he jumped at the chance, and he was the perfect person for the job because not only was he a teacher of biology, but also a teacher of ethics, science, and religion, which he had taught for over 20 years. Each science class for the monks not only included teacher and monks, but among each group of monks was one senior monk who spoke English well and was largely responsible for translating the ideas of science into Tibetan in a way that would be understandable to the monks who had no prior experience with science. In this case, that monk was Yundrung Khonchok, who is also a highly talented artist who illustrated this book. In addition, although the book is largely by Ari Eisen, each chapter contains sections by Venerable Khonchok, who provide a beautiful window into the monk's experience of the training. The classes were a great collaboration for all, and everybody learned a great deal. While the Dalai Lama was interested in how science can help people of faith, Ari Eisen was interested in how faith and belief can help people of science. This is very refreshing to me, as often the official position of science is that religion or faith should be excluded from science entirely, and perhaps should be excluded from university curriculum entirely. And this is especially odd since, when questioned, more than 50% of scientists admit to having some spiritual beliefs. This points out the irony that, in general, scientists are not open to religious ideas, while the Dalai Lama and the monks are open to scientific ideas. In the author's own words, scientists are the ones who accuse people of faith of being closed-minded and not listening to reason. The book is interesting in many, many ways, not the least of which is when the scientists talk about the latest and most up-to-date knowledge, only to find out that many of those ideas have been held by Buddhists for thousands of years. Now, unlike many others, I'm not one who looks to science to verify or validate spiritual information. The ideas of science change very quickly, and one rarely has to go back more than a decade or two to find that the ideas of current science have almost nothing in common to what they believed or thought a few years ago. I am more interested in the underpinning idea of the book, which is that one does not have to choose science or religion, but that each can inform each other. Two apparently highly divergent views of life can work in harmony to shed light on life and what it means to be a human being. Science in its pure form is pretty sterile. It has nothing to say about any meaning in life. Fortunately for us, Ari Eisen is not one who follows the philosophy of scientism, which says there is no meaning to life, no free will, no actual mind. He is a scientist in the best version of the word, one who is more interested in finding the truth than in being right. The book contains 8 chapters, each of which involves a scientific idea being proposed, and then the monks, acting like scientists, conduct experiments to see if the idea is valid or not. Of course, the monks are not so much interested in science for its own sake, but to see if it sheds any light on, or supports or contradicts, the philosophical ideas that they hold. So they consider such ideas as whether or not bacteria are sentient, or how life began, and whether humans are inherently good or not. In the first chapter of the book, the monks try to decide whether single-celled organisms are sentient or not. To do so, the monks employ the scientific method, preparing dishes with those organisms in them, and then introducing either food or toxins into the dish to see whether the cells can sense these items. And sure enough, they do. They either move towards the food or away from the toxins. So does that mean that they are sentient? That depends on what definition you use for sentience. Science has one definition. The Buddhists seem to have another. For science, it means responding to senses, the root of the word sentient. Since the cells sense whether there is food or toxins, they can be said to be sentient in the scientific sense. But for the Buddhists, sentience means having feeling, being able to feel pain, being able to desire pleasure, being able to have the goal of happiness and other somewhat higher order thinking. And since they couldn't determine this, half the monks decided that cells were sentient, and half decided they weren't. So for the monks, it's still an open question. It was at this point that the author and teacher displayed one of the qualities that I admired and mentioned in the beginning of this speech. He did not try to convince the monks that whatever science taught was right and whatever the monks thought was wrong. He did not convey that there is only one possibility answer and that science has it. And even though he doesn't explain what it means or elaborates on it at all, he mentions the word scientism in this chapter. And so I'm going to tell you just a little bit of what that means. In its simplest form, the most technical definition, scientism, applying science in unwarranted situations not amenable to the scientific method. There are, however, two components to it. Suppose, for example, that science defines matter as anything which occupies space and has weight. As a scientific principle, that idea has valid uses. But some scientists turn that into a philosophy of metaphysics. And metaphysics is a philosophy that tells us what exists and what is real. And if you follow that to its logical conclusion, to those who follow the doctrine of scientism, which sadly most scientists do, love is not real. Your mind is not real. God is not real. Free will is not real, and the host of the other things. And because of this, we think that none of these occupy physical space or weigh anything. Scientists say they don't exist. A second part of scientism is that science is the only proper method to finding truth, and some scientists believe, therefore, scientists essentially holds the patent on all of truth. And if science can't verify it, then it isn't true. If you say you see spirits or feel God, scientism dismisses it and doesn't investigate any further simply because you can't see it, you can't weigh it, it doesn't exist. That's the end of that story. For those of you who have heard me talk about ecclesiastic ideas, you know that I believe that all living beings, being especially human beings, have a goodness and a perfection at their core. All humans are, at their core, equal in their rights to pursue happiness. That doctrine, however, does not mean that all human actions or even ideas are equal. The best Buddhist answer I have ever heard for this and why we should be compassionate to even difficult people was given in a lecture I heard by our own Geshe-la. Dr. Geshe Lobsang Tenzin explained it this way. If a patient comes to you with a disease, you hate the disease, not the person. If you can cure the disease, the person will be whole again. End of quote. In my own life, while I'm delighted to hear different opinions and ideas and learn from them, I don't believe that all ideas and opinions have equal value. You cross that line for me when you say that everybody else is wrong, that you have the one and only true religion, and that you know everything. I wouldn't want anybody to pass laws that force me to be a vegan or not to have pets or to change my political party or anything else, and I don't want a scientist to tell me that he or she holds the patent on truth and that anything I or anybody else might believe in is wrong and foolish. But that is really what many scientists do believe in, I think. And fortunately, if you were to find a list of all the leading scientists, all those who changed the science by thinking of something new and different, like Einstein with relativity or Bohr with quantum mechanics, all of them are not followers of scientism. Einstein was a lover of nature and had a spiritual sensibility woven into almost all of his theories. And their very success came because they did not insist that science knew everything. And they brought science to new heights by thinking the way no other scientist had thought before. By realizing that there was something incomplete or wrong about the prevailing ideas, and deciding to find out what was wrong and how scientists would shift their thinking. And fortunately for us, Ari Eisen is one of those special scientists who is very open-minded, leaves room for spiritual beliefs in all people, even scientists, and doesn't think he or science or anyone knows everything. As the lessons continue, the monks investigate the subjects of life and death, of how life began, and whether or not humans are basically good, among other things. And rather than go through each subject one at a time, I want to tell you some of the evidence they found and the conclusions they made. The ultimate cause of death is birth. Every birth ends in death. As soon as you are born, you are on the path to death. But unlike most of us who fear death and seek to find a way out of it, Buddhists already know that science has found out. Death is just as carefully regulated as life, and death is absolutely necessary for life. You came from a single cell, one single sperm reached an egg and fertilized it. Along the way, tens of millions of sperm cells had to die to make that happen. Then that single cell started to gestate to eventually become you 9 months later. And that single cell had all of the chromosomes and DNA, and then that cell split into two cells, each having the same DNA and the same chromosomes. But for those two cells to be created, the original cell had to sacrifice itself and die. The process is repeated over and over again. Each cell dies and becomes two new ones until you have the trillions of cells it takes to make you. Each cell starts out as a clone. It has exactly the same genes as the original cell, but although they have exactly the same DNA, they develop differently. Some become your organs, your heart, your lungs, some become your muscles, and so on. That alone should prove to you that everything is just genetic, and you can't help what you are. Every cell in your body started the exact same way, but each developed differently. And it doesn't stop after you're born. At the end of a single cell, 98% of the cells in your body have died and been replaced. Some of the cells in your body last only seconds. Some last almost a year, and some just a bit more. If you pop a morsel of food into your mouth and swallow, within minutes, the cells of your stomach lining will begin to die and be replenished. Within 5 days, not a single cell of your original stomach lining will remain. All of it's new. There are countless examples of how death is required for life. One example is that we all have different diets. Some of us eat meat, some of us only vegetables, but no matter what you eat, you are eating something that was once alive. We can only live with when something else dies, and Buddhists know this and regard death as a normal part of existence. Suppose you had a strawberry plant that was immortal. Pretty soon your garden would be overrun with strawberries, and it would kill out all the other forms of life in your garden. What do you think would happen if no humans ever died? The earth hosts about 7.6 billion people right now. And imagine if none of them died and people kept living. How long do you think the earth would last? And this is just one example of how the interaction between scientists and monks have benefited both. Each has learned that the other makes assumptions. The monks learned science and were able to return to their people and teach it to them. And the scientists learned the Buddhist point of view, which helped them in their science and in their approach to finding truth without preconceived notions. Both learn that the cultural framework in which they learn alters not only how you learn, but what you learn. You can't learn about something that you refuse to even consider. Humans all have basic flaws built into their nature, so no matter what their occupation or philosophy. And scientists may suffer from following scientism, but some religions suffer from their own version of that affliction. Many scientists say that if you are a scientist, then you must not be religious. And many religious people that say if you're religious, you should not be a scientist. And this book reminds us that there is much to be gained on both sides from mutual exposure to the ideas of those who don't think like you. We are all part of a larger system of relationships that warrants our understanding and sharing together. An ecosystem transfers and refers to a complex set of relationships between components of an environment. And these environments can be living, as in the case of humans, or non-living, as in the case of weather. Science proves over and over that Buddhists have known for thousands of years that everything is tied together. That's why there can be a hurricane on the other side of the world and it'll rain here and in countless other places. That's why all the organisms in the body function together and affect each other. I've given talks before that shows how everything is tied together through the endless knot metaphor. And I didn't mention bacteria before because we tend to think of bacteria as bad because when germs were first discovered, it was in the context of causing disease. But they can also be used to cure. That's what's given rise to antibiotics. In time, we learned that antibiotics that kill the bad germs are indiscriminate and also kill the good ones. So now we have probiotics to restore the balance. One eradicates, one replaces. The harmful and beneficial are inseparably tied together. All these organisms together are called the biome. So again, it shows that we have a symbiotic relationship with things that are not inherently part of us. We destroy them to our detriment, or we ignore them, or are ignorant of them to our disadvantage. Example after example is given in the book to show the interconnectedness of all things. Another fascinating intersection of science and spirituality is described by the author as the living staircase. In fact, the basic idea existed a long time ago, and philosophy called it the great chain of being. And when they investigate this idea in the chapter about ecology, they find that an inherent part of the process is cycling. Our bodies maintain health in a state called homeostasis by a series of feedback loops that keep things in balance. And this is the key to maintaining our internal ecology. But the same is true for external ecology. Coral reefs, weather, plants, and pretty much everything goes in cycles. One thing happens, it causes something else to happen. And it goes on and on and on until things are back where they started. And then it starts over and over again. You go to sleep, then you wake up. Then you go to sleep again, and you wake up. While all this is going on for most of us, it's dark while we sleep, and it's light when we wake up. And that is because the earth is in a repeating cycle of revolution. So that half the time it faces the sun, and the other half it faces the moon. And meanwhile, besides rotating on its axis, it's orbiting the sun, sometimes coming closer to it and sometimes further away. That results in the cycles we call the seasons: spring, summer, fall, winter. Buddhists have known this and applied it to life in the doctrine of reincarnation. You may think of reincarnation as only Buddhist, or at least in the East, but that's not so. Almost everybody believed in reincarnation, including the early Christians, at least until 200 AD. We know this from several sources, not the least of which is the Dead Sea Scrolls. And even now the New Testament talks about how Jesus came back from the dead, which in a way is a form of reincarnation. That belief has changed officially much later, but the Buddhists still believe that life is an endless cycle, and it includes humans. We can look outside at a tree and see beautiful leaves on it, then watch them die and turn colors and fall off the tree. But in a few months, the leaves on the trees return. We could say that tree leaves, and we could also say that people on the earth people. This book is enjoyable. It's enjoyable on many levels and is very worth reading. I believe in science and religion. I believe in love. I believe love never dies, but cycles over and over again. Our minds and hearts together can access divine love, and the greatest gift on earth is love and compassion. I am grateful for the collaboration between the monks, the teachers, and the scientists at Emory, because it helps us understand what it means to be human. I feel that great breakthroughs will occur when science and spirituality finally work in tandem. And the results really are extraordinary. So I hope you have a chance to read the book. Thank you. And now I think we have a little film that has, I think, Ari speaking about the book and how it came about.
So I was looking out here this morning before class at all you monks and nuns going to class and this whole building and this whole project. So it's amazing because just 10 or 12 years ago there was nothing. But now this project is taking on its own life.
The modern education system has so much things that it lacks, like moral discipline and so on. So we really need to have a change in that, a change which can be productive for our future generations. And to do that, I think that it is very much essential that we integrate the ancient Indian knowledge into the modern education system.
It's kind of magic because this holiness just has this vision, and then people from all over the world, like Geshe-la from Tibetans and people like Tom, people from all over the world have come and made this holiness and vision, this reality.
This experience has opened my eyes to how much fun it is to interact with students and monks who were completely into what they were doing, why they were there, and having fun learning. Everybody was involved, and it just completely turned me on to teaching.
Some of them were very much interested and intrigued in the scientific studies because although they have learned so much from Buddhist philosophy, I think science shows something much more like tangible, in terms of proving things through scientific methods and through empirical data and so on. So I think this is something very much new and something very much needed in the 21st century.
Just by itself is kind of amazing, right? Because your curriculum and your learning really hasn't changed that much in 600 years. We hear this holiness invites us in and to rethink the way you're learning and what you're learning. Well, I've been involved with DTSI from the very beginning for over 10 years. And at the beginning, I just kind of got involved because it sounded kind of cool with Dalai Lama and monks. I didn't really know much. But I have to say that it's changed dramatically the way I think about learning, the way I think about teaching, the way I think about communicating across cultures. Because although this is a very dramatic example, big, tall, white American scientists talking to monks cross-legged, it's not really that different than what I do every day in America, which is talk to people from all over the world, students from Asia, and Africa, and all different cultures. So it's really given me insight into how to think about teaching and think about people coming from different worldviews and how they're learning in relationship to what I know.
I heard that the idea was that it was 100 years like that. And so this year, I thought that was coming in, I thought that was unattainable. But then this year coming in, I've seen how much in just 2 years the monks have matured scientifically, the sophistication of the questions. Not only, this is now the 5th year of the program, the 5th year students that I'm teaching. Not only is it the 5th year students who are much more sophisticated, but the 3rd year students, the 2nd year students, all up and down. So I think that the students are talking to each other, and the whole cohort of students
knowledge from Buddhist science and Buddhist philosophy, then we can create a collaboration of knowledge which can have a very positive outcome. Although the outcome may not appear immediately, in the long run, as a student, I'm very much confident that there will be great results and great progress. And I see it as a contribution to the future generations and humanity as a whole.
His Holiness talks about ETSI as a 100-year project. And there's been many times in the last 10 years where we thought the project was just going to die out, but always through His Holiness and through the community, it's kept going. And now, with the Science Center here at Great Palm and the Science Centers at the other monasteries, it's clearly here to stay. And it's on the Geshe Dam for the first time this summer. So I think the next phase is sustaining and growing it. And we've built a cohort of 24 to 30 monks who are taking leadership, they're teaching, they're developing science centers, we have textbooks, we have videos, we're developing a whole new vocabulary dictionary. So I think the next step is taking all those pieces and figuring out the best way to integrate them and sustain them for decades to come.
Ancient Indian knowledge focuses much more on the more subtle level, like on the people, the mental level, not just on the physical attributes, not just on the external objects, but more on the mental level, the spiritual level, the inner value, the level of the inner values. So that is where I think there is a slight difference. But ultimately, I think what we are trying to do here is we are trying to collaborate them and then find a perfect approach, a perfect way to live a positive life, to live the right life. I think that is what we are trying to accomplish here.
Your Holiness, thank you for envisioning this project, the Emory Tibet Science Initiative. It has deeply changed us and the lives of many monks and nuns, and will continue to do so for generations. We have changed the ways we think about teaching, learning, science, Buddhism, and life. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
The book tells our story of our lives and the kind of culmination of this project and how it's changed us and how we think about each other's cultures, about teaching and learning. So that was one of the best things.
I think it's interesting. Someone once said to me that they thought that the purpose of religion was to live life more skillfully. And I think that's such an interesting thing because it points, for me, to the nature of reality. Really in religion, in whatever religion we're coming from, what we're trying to identify is what is the nature of reality. Because let's face it, our reality, the realness of the livingness that we have here as human beings is exactly the same as the realness of the livingness of someone the other side of the world living in a jungle who's never heard of any of the religions. We are both human beings. We both experience the same sort of feelings, the same sort of sensations, and the nature of our inner world is the same. I've always thought that, in a sense, religion was a cultural interpretation of the same experience. So each of the religions is a cultural interpretation of a particular experience. And, for me, it all comes back to the nature of consciousness. That idea that Lexi was talking about the sentientness. If you go right the way back, to the Big Bang, then those rocks and things that flew out at that particular moment had the potential for D to exist in the world. You know, it had the potential for us all to be there, because we know that because we are here now. And so there is that nature of consciousness that goes right the way through from the Big Bang into us today. And what we're all doing, exploring, and that includes science, it includes religion, is we're trying to work out what is the nature of reality. And having tried to find out what the nature of reality is, then we try to live life more skillfully. I always like the idea about miracles. You know, I'm an Episcopal, you know, Church of England, and you know, I love the idea about miracles, which someone described miracles as not things that were outside the laws of science, but were outside the laws of science as we've discovered them at the moment. And so it is a question of the nature of discovery that enables us to find out what the nature of reality is. So that's my little sort of penny's worth, or cent's worth, as I should say, as I'm in England. Geshe, do you have any, what comments would you like to make? And then we'll probably open it up, I think, to the congregation audience, you know.
Yes, thank you. I think that's brilliant, you know, that miracles may not necessarily be understood outside of the laws of nature, but the one that science has not yet discovered.
Yeah.
You know. And that's true of consciousness and many of the aspects of our life. We are still learning about who we are and how we can really harness the aspects of our life that can contribute to towards our well-being and the flourishing of the human beings. So this book is wonderful, and Alexia, thank you for such a brilliantly summarizing and expanding on.
Well, it's hard to summarize it, but the exciting news is that science and traditions are talking, and that's where the real breakthroughs are going to happen. So thank you.
Thank you, thank you. That was really brilliant. I want to have that copy of
Of
that.
course.
Anybody got any questions or any thoughts? You have to say them out loud because we're not miking up everybody. Yeah, go for it.
I've been in medicine for 40 years, and I'm married to a surgeon. And I think in medical school, that they should get the monks to have a curriculum in medical school.
In medical school as well, yeah.
We have healing hands, we do all kinds of spiritual work. The doctors have nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
So I think that would really be good to incorporate spirituality in some physicians.
Yes.
I've done it with my husband, it's taken a long time.
That's a fantastic idea. So to incorporate that within the medical framework as well. Thank you for that.
Can I say a word about that?
Yes, you please do.
Absolutely. Thank you for raising this issue. You are absolutely right. You know, we need this in all aspects of our life, but particularly in the healthcare providers, because they are day in and out, you know, faced with such seemingly unsurmountable the challenges of taking care of people, and then it's very, very difficult on them. You know, so that's why the burnout and the empathy fatigue, and it really affects the doctors and nurses and the other healthcare providers. We have been very fortunate actually at Emory University to bring compassion training, you know, like that.
For the surgeon, it'd be great if they could meditate before they went into surgery.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's very true. And actually, you know, that someone here from this Aspen community has encouraged us to actually come up with a roadmap how to bring this into the healthcare, you know, for the doctors, the students, medical students who will be future doctor, residents, nurses, and others. And at Emory, we are developing a kind of comprehensive program for bringing compassion, not as a religious value, but a basic human value, you know, that which, you know, another brilliant scientist like the Darwin, who is the father of the evolution, right? I mean, that he understood the importance of sympathy, the compassion, you know, that for our survival. He saw that sympathy as being the strongest, you know, the instinct that for our communal survival or individual well-being. So we are, you know, doing that, and His Holiness the Lama has been talking about this for many decades, and that's why the curriculum, like social, emotional, and ethical learning, or the, you know, education of the heart and mind, it's really grounded in this foundation of compassion and kindness. Thank you.
I thought it was interesting as well that when those Thai boys were in those caves, before they were rescued, they were taught to meditate by their teacher as a way of surviving in an environment like that.
Yes.
And, when you look at our health, that idea of meditation being an aspect that enables us to weather the storms of life is fantastic. Good. Somebody else? Anybody else want to ask a question or?
How do we get a copy of the book?
Well, I think
There are some copies of
you'll be able to buy copies at the back, which would be great. Yes. Yes,
Just for you.
Laura.
It's right there.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Neurologically, when you're meditating, what happens in the brain? And I'm sure it's benefit because stress deteriorates health. And how does it benefit?
Can you all hear that? Neurologically, she's asking, what happens when you meditate? How does it benefit? What happens in the brain? Do you want to say a little bit about that? 'Cause-
Sure, thank you.
Call on it in different situations, just like the caves, to use it as a tool.
Yeah, so, research in meditation is quite recent. I mean, it's still growing, but it's quite safe to kind of point to at least certain activities or the aspect or the circuits of the brain that may be involved in meditation, in some kinds of meditation that will be very helpful for us in stress reduction and or a certain sense of kind of connectedness with others. So just one example I would give. Neuroscientists now talk about a certain part of the brain in the kind of the medial prefrontal cortex, what they call it. They refer to this as default kind of, the default mode circuit. Default mode is like in the computer when we are not doing something, is where it automatically goes to, right? The default mode. Default mode circuit of the brain, when it activates, what they find usually is that people are ruminating, about the things, that what went wrong or what should happen, and worrying and all those things about me. When you are deliberately or consciously, intentionally present, focus on some task or communication or the reading or the eating or whatever, when you are, those default mode circuits calm down. But when your mind wanders, often default mode circuits, you find it activated, When it's activated, it's about ruminations and like that. So what that tells is that, through training, we can develop a greater capacity to be present, that to less kind of, hijacked by those default mode situations, and thereby, it contributes towards our well-being, because being stuck in those ruminations is very stressful, and that's why the researchers, when they publish their findings, they're published under the titles that wandering mind is unhappy mind. That because when we are not present, focused, and it goes into the default mode, often it's about things that we kind of struggle with, issues that we don't want to happen, or worrying and fearing, or reliving certain kind of things that happened that we didn't want to. Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, tying in, is Emory a place where there could be like double-blind studies of, say, the effect of meditation on the immune system, or say, cancer, heart disease, stuff like that?
Yes, the question is Emory at the place where these kind of studies are being conducted or have been conducted? Yes, actually, Emory is one of the places. I mean, it's not the only place, but there are some actually much larger places like Wisconsin, where Richie Davidson works with a huge kind of team and funding, that doing lots of studies. But Emory has been one of the pioneers and continued to be one of the leading institutions investigating the meditation and its benefits. One of the decisive studies that we have done at Emory University was back in 2005, 2006, 2007, for about 5 semesters. We worked with freshman college students to see when you can introduce them to this compassion exercises or the meditation or the training, what you call, whether it has an impact on your stress reactions that can be measured not just through subjective or the reports that you ask through the questionnaires, how you're feeling and did you feel better and all those things, but actually very kind of hard measures, through the certain chemicals in your body, like the inflammation, like the IL-6, which is an immune response, which is a stress response, basically, or cortisol, the classical stress hormone. By subjecting the students to certain psychosocial stress tests, and then drawing blood, from them, and then to see before the intervention, 6 weeks of training, and after 6 weeks, if there's those stress chemicals in the body that are different or not. What we found was that in the high practice group, in the meditation group, that high practice, the students who came to class and also practice outside, about 90 minutes on average per week, per week. Those students showed significantly lower levels of inflammation in their, through the blood system, but also the cortisols, which our brain, secretes in the face of certain danger, real or perceived. That when you feel that you are, kind of cornered, that's where it happens. But what we found was that in these two groups of students, in the high practice group, of course, when you are, subjected to this social stress test, it's a very stressful test. Almost everyone will get stress in this kind of. It's called the Trier social stress test. What we found was that, yes, when they are subjected to that, in that 15-minute period, yes, their cortisols go up, levels go up, but then how fast they drop, it's very different in the two groups. The high practice group, cortisols drop down very quickly, and the low practice groups seem to kind of linger, which is, when you are faced with certain challenges, you want to be able to mount this stress response so that you can protect, whether, conquer or flee, fight or flee, that's what they call. But once the danger is gone, you don't want to be stuck there, as if you are still cornered, and that's where the stress takes a huge impact on your body. That's why this biologist, the expert scientist on stress response, Robert Sapolsky, he wrote his book with the title "Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers." That is.
And we're going to have doctors at the back of the room just to take your blood at the end. I'm afraid we've run out of time now. So if you'd like to give blood. Just want to say, I'm afraid we're out of time now. I'm sorry. I just want to say, it's very interesting that the Archbishop of Canterbury, the last one, Rowan Williams, he said that the study of meditation was the only practical answer to this advertising, financial, political culture that we have in the world at the moment. And that it is a truly revolutionary act to take up meditation, because you're coming out of your mind and into your natural consciousness. And I think that was, the religions are coming together on that. Right. I'd like to thank Lexi so much for facilitating, making this happen. It's so great that we have these opportunities to have these things in the Valley, and you really make that happen, the spirit side of the mind, body, and spirit of Aspen. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming today. Really appreciate you coming on. Geshe, thank you so much for all that you're doing, everything, and also thank the monks.